Welcome to the Times of Israel's daily briefing. Today is Tuesday, August 12th, day 676 of the war. Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. Hi, Manny. Thanks for joining me today.
Hi, Amanda.
So this morning, Israel's coordinator of government activities in the territories, or COGAT, came out with a scathing response to widespread international accusations of starvation in Gaza. Manny will fill us in. And also, amid global outcry, an Israeli military spokesperson said yesterday that the prominent Al Jazeera journalist it killed a day earlier was an active Hamas member who received a salary from the terror group. We'll also dive into how long it will take the IDF to roll out the new plan to take Gaza City. So all of this and more when we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. The IDF may take at least another week or more to gauge how many troops it will need for the government-ordered renewed offensive in Gaza City we heard yesterday. This comes, of course, Manny, as relations between the IDF and the political echelon seem to me to be more strained than we've previously seen throughout this very long war.
Yeah, that's correct. The army is right now, I would say specifically the Southern Command, is drawing up these plans to I suppose, take Gaza City or capture Gaza City as instructed by the political level. And right now it will take a bit more time for them to actually know how many forces will be needed for this operation. Regardless, military officials are saying that reservists will need to be called up for this operation beyond what was initially planned. In advance, the army sort of plans its year long of how many reservists it needs. It will need to call up more. The question is how many. Will they need to be called up for the operation itself, or will they only be called up to replace standing army troops on other fronts? And once the outline is defined, then they'll sort of know. And what I mean by outline is the army will determine whether or not it's going to push into Gaza City from one direction, from multiple directions. Is it doing it at a very slow pace with maybe one division or two divisions, or is it going to go at a much faster pace with multiple divisions, 3 or 4 even? That's something that they're discussing now in the army. And once these plans are sort of ready, they'll present them to the political level for them to be approved, and then they'll go ahead and call up the reservists. It is important to say that, at least according to all the reports that we've been hearing and all the leaks coming from these cabinet meetings, is that this offensive in Gaza City will only take place in October. The sort of deadline that was given for the IDF to evacuate the civilian population from Gaza City, as around 1 million Palestinians still in Gaza City, is October 7th, 2025, meaning the 2-year anniversary of the onslaught. So it isn't going to happen anyway for the next 2 months.
And October 7th, 2025, if I'm not mistaken, is the first day of the Sukkot holiday, whereas the slaughter took place on the final day of that holiday. It's, of course, very symbolic to have this date marked in terms of the evacuation. But you're considering it happening in October, which means what is meant to happen in the next 2 months throughout the Strip?
It's a really good question. I mean, the army says it's continuing to operate. We are still seeing strikes in Gaza. We're seeing troops operate in certain areas, even in Gaza City itself, in sort of the eastern neighborhoods that are closer to the Israeli border. And we're seeing continued operations in Rafah and in Khan Yunis, definitely less intense. But we aren't going to see any major offensives being sort of taking place in the next 2 months, I believe, at least according to what's being presented right now. But operations will continue. The army still uncovering tunnels, is still carrying out strikes in Gaza against Hamas members and other operatives from other terror groups. The operations will continue at sort of this lower, I would say, lower intensity.
Okay, so this morning we heard from Israel's coordinator of government activities in the territories, which we generally call COGAT, that Hamas has been inflating the toll of Palestinians, it says, that have died of malnutrition. And it adds most of those verified to have died had preexisting medical conditions. So what is COGAT basing its conclusions on? What kind of data sources does it have?
So interestingly, COGAT's using Hamas's data here on their claims. And their analysis has basically shown that Hamas in July sort of reported quite a significant number of people who allegedly died by starvation or malnutrition. They brought the numbers from the Hamas ministry, and it said that 66 deaths were from the beginning of the war up until June 25, and then in July 25 it reported 133 deaths. And COGAT notes and in its analysis that in the past, the Hamas Health Ministry would provide the identities of those who had died, but in July it stopped doing that. It was just providing numbers and not actually providing the identities of those who had died. And then they analyzed essentially reported deaths based on social media posts and news reports from Gaza, trying to find the individuals who have died, and they weren't able to find 133 cases. In July, they were able to find a handful. And those handful of cases, according to COGAT, the vast majority of them were people who had pre-existing medical conditions that led to the deterioration of their health, sort of unrelated, at least to COGAT, unrelated to their nutritional status, meaning the sort of what's happening in Gaza with regard to food. I will say that COGAT has previously said that there is issues with access to food in some areas of Gaza, but there is no widespread famine, at least as Hamas's claims. And COGAT in their report also provided a couple of examples of Palestinians who have been reported to have been suffering from starvation or have died from starvation, and in fact their cases were unrelated and they had other health conditions that caused them to be in this state or to have died. It's still a bit more of a battle of narratives here, and Hamas's claims have caused international pressure on Israel and have actually led to Israel changing its policies and letting in more aid and the airdrops, of course, as well. But COGAT is still staying with this line that Hamas is presenting a more serious crisis in Gaza than there may actually be, for political gain, for pressure on the hostage negotiations and other things.
Right. It's obviously working, as you said. And COGAT also, of course, accuses Hamas of orchestrating this as a huge PR push, meaning it's not just inflating numbers and floating them out there, meaning it's orchestrating a campaign to get these numbers out there to change people's hearts and minds against Israel. It's almost impossible to combat that. Of course, our prime minister staging a press conference and having the pictures on the screen and saying debunking them is not going to move the envelope very far. I wonder what's happening, however, in terms of the new approach of flooding the Gaza Strip with aid. Is it actually successful at this point?
I wouldn't call it flooding at this point. Today we saw COGAT announce that the UN had collected around 300 trucks worth of aid and brought them into Gaza. The UN has said that at least 600 trucks are required to feed the population in Gaza. So we're still not at the flooding yet, and even the airdrops, each airdrop is barely a truck or two worth of aid. So it's not really that much. But I think we'll see, at least, in the next 2 months before this major Gaza City operation is carried out, I think we will see the aid increase even further. And if Israel wants the Palestinian population in Gaza City to evacuate and head to other areas, they'll need to then set up more aid distribution points in other areas and increase the flow of aid to those other areas to encourage people to actually head there.
Okay, we're going to go to a short break and continue discussing the battle of narratives. And we're back. I'm Amanda Borschel-Dan here with our military correspondent, Emanuel Fabian. An Israeli strike in Gaza City on Sunday night killed a prominent Palestinian journalist for the Qatari broadcaster Al Jazeera. His name is Anas al-Sharif, and the IDF has long argued that he was a Hamas terrorist in charge of rocket launching. So, Manny, what is the IDF basing this accusation on?
So since October, the IDF has been accusing Sharif of being a member of Hamas. It published documents at the time that it seized from Gaza, from 2 separate locations in Gaza, that it claims prove his military affiliation with Hamas. And I've looked at the documents myself, and there is some interesting information on them. So first of all, according to these documents, Sharif joined Hamas's military wing in December of 2013. He was certified then as a team commander of a Hamas rocket launching squad in northern Gaza in January of 2019. These documents also list his military ID number. And then a separate document shows, this document's from 2023, but there's a date on it that says that in 2017, Sharif was wounded during training for Hamas. He was wounded in the eye and suffered some hearing loss, but he continued to remain on the payroll. I believe this document's from before the war, not after the war began. And then another document the army published, which is undated, shows that Sharif's name and his ID and everything are on the phone registry for the elite Nukhba force company in Hamas's East Jabalia battalion. He's also got a code name on this directory. It's unclear when this is from. It's possible it was after his rocket launching squad sort of role or before, but there's no information the army has provided that he was an active Hamas terrorist during the war itself, which I think is something that much of the criticism against the army is based on. At least according to the army, they said yesterday that at the time of his killing, he was an active member of Hamas. He was on payroll still, but the army hasn't provided proof of that yet. I will add that there's plenty of pictures of Sharif with Hamas leaders that he's previously published with Yahya Sinwar and other Hamas leaders. He sort of lauded the October 7th attacks as they were being carried out in posts on his Telegram channel. So we're not talking about someone who is, I would say, completely impartial in Gaza. I did also see a BBC report that said that before working for Al Jazeera, he was working for a Hamas-run media organization in Gaza. So definitely someone who is sort of part of Hamas in one way or another. At the time of his killing, we're not sure yet. The army says he was, but at least according to Al Jazeera, he was being a reporter for them. He was one of the more prominent journalists in Gaza during the war, especially since others have been killed, others that Israel has accused of being Hamas operatives as well. And he was based in northern Gaza in Jabalia, in the Jabalia area, and was sort of very prominent in a lot of broadcasts. If you recall, when Agam Berger, the hostage soldier, was released, he got exclusive access to film her being taken by the Hamas operatives to the release point, being handed over to the Red Cross. So definitely someone who's well in there with Hamas.
Right. Obviously, there has never been free press in Gaza under the Hamas regime, right? He was killed alongside 4 other journalists. Is the supposition by the IDF that they too were involved with Hamas?
Unfortunately, the army has not said anything on that. They haven't named the other journalists or said whether or not they were. It's very possible that the army considers them sort of collateral damage in this strike. Whether or not targeting this Hamas member / journalist, is it worth killing 4 other journalists as well? Whether or not they were or weren't also affiliated with Hamas is a good question the army has not answered on yet.
And my other question, in addition to the one that you raised, is why would this specific person be worth the international global fallout for his killing?
He's not the first as well. There's been other prominent journalists in Gaza who the IDF has said are members of Hamas as well, who Israel has killed, and there's been international outcry and condemnation. It's a really good question whether or not this is worth the sort of the condemnation that Israel received afterwards or not. But I just thought about this earlier today, and there was a statement that the previous IDF spokesperson said on October 9th, 2023, so 2 days after the onslaught, and he said that, I don't have the quote in front of me right now, but he said that everything to do with Hamas, their assets, their members, the political leaders, the military leaders, everything that belongs to Hamas is doomed, and they are something that Israel will attack and remove. So everything to do with Hamas, Israel says it will attack in Gaza. It doesn't matter if it's a low-level operative or a senior official or a political official. That's what the army has been saying throughout the war.
So he was on a list, and this was the opportune time to get him, essentially.
Something like that. Although I do think the army could have targeted him at any time in the past few months or even year. He wasn't exactly in hiding.
Okay, let's switch gears and discuss the West Bank. And Defense Minister Israel Katz said on Sunday that IDF troops will remain deployed to northern West Bank refugee camps at least until the end of the year. I believe he said this already previously, and we're talking about the offensive Operation Iron Wall, which began in the Jenin refugee camp, which is adjacent to the city of Jenin. It's basically a built-up neighborhood. It's not tents, not a camp in that kind of a meaning. And later it expanded to include the refugee camps near the city of Tulkarm in the western West Bank. Again, more like neighborhoods, not like camps. So, Manny, what's going on there now? Tens of thousands evacuated back in January. What's the situation now?
So none of the civilians have returned to these camps. But on the other hand, there's been no terrorism coming from these camps. There's been, I mean, before this operation, we would see in the West Bank almost every other night shooting attacks against IDF troops or against IDF posts or even against Israeli motorists on roads or terrorists who set out from the camps to carry out attacks in Israel, suicide bombings, shooting attacks. We haven't seen any really in the past year emerging from these camps because no one's in the camps anyway to sort of prepare and launch these attacks. And during this time, according to Katz, there's been a drop in 80% of terror alerts in the West Bank in general. So it really does show that these camps were actually the sort of the hotbeds of terror, and they had been for a very long time. And since operating in these camps, the IDF has demolished quite a lot of buildings in there because these camps, like you said, they're built up neighborhoods, but they're very, very densely packed. They have very, very small alleyways. I've been in both the Tulkarm camp and the Jenin camp, and I've seen the very, very narrow alleys. What the army did is it demolished several dozen buildings to basically make pathways through the camp. So in the future, if it needs to return there and operate there, it can do so with ease and much more quickly and allow vehicles to actually pass through these areas. And there was a lot of back and forth with the court and Palestinians petitioning against the demolition of their homes, but it was eventually approved by the courts and the army went through and did it. I think more than 100 buildings were demolished in Tulkarm camp alone. And that's where the army is. It's deployed there. It has a small number of forces in the camp, preventing anybody from returning. Katz says they'll remain there until the end of the year. I do think eventually the army will withdraw and then come back if they see a Hamas cell or Islamic Jihad cell preparing an attack.
Okay, Manny. So these forces, you're saying it's a very small number of forces in Jenin and Tulkarm right now. And of course, we're thinking about the rollout in Gaza City. And so as ever, we are wondering what's happening with the Haredi conscription. And is there any news on that front from you?
Not really. The Hashmonaim Brigade, the new brigade for ultra-Orthodox troops, just the first company of troops completed their training, which is nice. I mean, it's 50 soldiers and there's another 50 currently in training. So by the end of the year, we should see another 50. The army also announced this week that it has established another technicians unit in the Air Force for Haredi troops, where they basically serve to fix F-16s and prepare them for flights. But in terms of the mass drafting of many ultra-Orthodox men, we haven't seen that yet. The army has sent out all the draft orders to all of them, all 80,000 that are in the pool of Haredi men who are eligible for conscription but haven't enlisted yet. It will take some time before the army starts, sending second draft notices and then starts issuing the sanctions against them. It will take some time.
All right, Manny, thank you for that update, slight as it was, and thank you for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Times of Israel's Daily Briefing. Please check out another installment tomorrow. This episode was produced by the Podwaves. If you have any questions or comments about this or any other episode, please drop us an email to podcast@timesofisrael.com. Until tomorrow, shalom.